Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well. And Doug, you've kind of come up with a very topical subject tonight, and I think it's something very, very interesting will be to our audience. So, Doug, you want to start?
Well, what I want to talk about tonight is if you start out with a biblical creationist worldview, your view of the family is a whole lot different than if you are really into evolution or something like that, or don't pay any attention to what God wants to do. And when I really realized how much God's creation played a part in my life and in origins, I look back on my Christian upbringing, and I saw some things in my mother and father that I liked that I did not see in the peers around me, a lot of the people that I went to college with. And I realized that being a Christian is something that is can be fairly unusual and rare in many cases,
Well, Doug, we were growing up, you and I both growing up at a very similar time in the 60s. You're talking, this is 50 years ago, Doug, 50 years ago. And things that the rot had already come in. I still remember years ago, Doug, and I've told this doesn't really have to do with the family per se, but I was kind of shocked. I was raised Roman Catholic, and you were raised Methodist, right? Okay. But I remember in high school, this was 1968, and I was riding in a back seat of a car with a friend of mine. No, I was in the front seat, I think. Doesn't really matter. And we're going by a street sign, and there was a big billboard up there, and it said, "Jesus saves." Mm-hmm. And the guy looked at me, his name was Mike, and he goes, "Yeah, that's a good idea. I think I need to put a little more money in the bank." Mm-hmm. Now, I thought he was joking, because even I was not really a Christian at the time, but even I knew what that meant. And I did not know the Bible at all. But I looked at him, and it's like he was dead serious. Now, I don't know whether he was pulling my leg, but to me, that indicates, even that far along, the Darwinian basically we're descended from animals, or if you will, even ultimately rocks, inanimate matter. The point of it is the concept of human beings as something special has already been eroded. Now, we know Darwinian thinking has been around for 150 years, but it's amazing how fast, and a lot of people don't really understand how the rot had seeped into the culture very early on. But a lot of it was in more academic circles, more colleges, universities, and by and large, a lot of your rural or even your suburban, it was kind of protected. I don't want to be protected, but they were inoculated against real Christianity by going to having kind of a shallow social club kind of Christianity, which basically did fine as long as you weren't challenged. But you're going to college, you're going to be challenged. Now, the problem is, Doug, since then, it's gotten a lot worse. And I think that's the subject you wanted to deal with when you're dealing with the rot of the family. And you say, what does the family have to do with creation? What does that? I mean, in some sense, it's pretty obvious. But in other ones, you say, well, that's kind of a social issue. You're dealing with a scientific issue or a different. But your worldview affects everything. And I think that's what you were getting to when you first started out, how you were raised. Even in my family, we were raised Roman Catholic. I'm the oldest of 9 kids. But it wasn't. But my mom had some real. She was more Protestant in her original, but she converted to Catholicism. I'm not talking about any of that stuff at this point in time. It's just that the world was getting more and more secular in the 60s, and God did something very amazing. And there's been a lot of talk in the recent years with the Jesus Freak movies and all the stuff that's coming out with that, and some of the revivals at Asbury and things like that. But the reality is, Doug, is the family is the core of what God has instituted among men to provide stability, purpose, a legacy, all of these things, but it also gives you a grasp of the way God makes you, and God created you And I looked up a couple of scriptures, Doug. And I'm not gonna after this. I'll let you do some talking, believe it or not. But I looked up 4 scriptures when I was upstairs. 2 of them are the same. They're in the Gospels, but 2 of them are in Genesis. They basically say the same thing. And I'll read them right directly, unless you want to read them, Doug. I don't care. But anyway, and this is about a family starts out with the concept that there's a mother and a father.
Right.
Okay, there's a man and a woman, a male and a female.
There's only one way that the biology works.
There's only one way. And that's why they're doing, and everyone knows this, and that's why they're trying to make gender something different. It makes that fluid, where sex is that's immutable. Though you can be fluid, makes no sense at all, but that's craziness. But it says here in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, and I think it's 27, yeah, Genesis 1:27, and then it says, Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Isn't that interesting? In the image of God he made him, the masculine. Male and female, he created them.
Right, yeah.
There is a feminine aspect to God. God is never described as a woman, but I'm saying there are the idea of nurturing and caring. That's God, okay? And also Genesis chapter 5, too. This is a little bit later, and this is after really you're dealing with the fall of man and all this kind of stuff's happened. And it gives you the chronology of Adam. And then this is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. Isn't that kind of dumb? I mean, everyone up until recent times has realized mankind is a neutered term. In a sense, it means male and female. And right here it kind of tells you that. But in case that's not good enough, for those who are Christians who have problems with this idea or are entertaining the ideas that gender is fluid, this is really clear in it's in the Gospels. It's in Matthew and Mark. Mark and Matthew basically say the same thing. It's Matthew 19, verse 4. Okay? And the Pharisees, actually we'll start with verse 3. The Pharisees also came to him, testing him and saying to him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? And then Jesus, his is his answer. What does he answer? From Genesis, he said, and he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. We're not going to deal with the whole idea of how divorces run through the family. It's been a disaster, but...
I think there's a comment though, is that the younger generation now, they're really afraid to get married.
Right.
And it's because divorce is so rampant, and culturally it's so easy to get a divorce that people don't want to mess around with that. You know, they have this little trump card that they hold in their hands as a weapon, saying, well, if you're gonna get out of line, well, I can just drop you. And there's nothing in the culture from a spiritual sense that people have a obligation to in order to keep their vows to another person.
Well, and the thing is, Doug, when you reject the biblical framework of what truth is and what reality really is, then all bets are off in any kind of stuff that is presented as fact or factual or normal or whatever. And we have incredible empirical evidence that it's not. Even the medical profession, up until recently, diagnosed people with transsexual, transgenderism, what they call them, dysphoria or something. I can't remember what the term of it is, but it's something. It's a mental condition that causes problem. But of course, I would say it's a sin issue too, as well, Doug.
Well, it goes back usually to where the youngster is abused at a young age.
Right, and of course they'll come up and give you some anecdotal evidence, and say, "Well, I was never abused," right? there's always going to be some people, Doug, no matter how easy the standards are, they will do the right thing. And then there are people that no matter how hard and strict they are, will do the wrong thing. But it's all those great unwashed masses in the middle that might go one way or the other that rules are set for. And God sets the rules. If God doesn't set the rules, and that's what the secularism is all about, Doug, then man sets the rules. And this man can make a rule here, this man can make a rule here, this woman can make a rule here, this woman can, and they all can be all contradicting each other.
Right.
And they're all just as valid. People don't understand that unless someone is making the rules that's outside of humanity. This is the old C.S. Lewis argument. Then the rules really have very little validity. The only thing you have is consensus. And if you get one consensus overriding another consensus, you're going to, rather than relying on the fact there was a book that was written by God Himself through human agency, but He used human beings, and it's been consistent. There is male and female.
And there's a reason for it. God, of course, is interested in reproduction. He wants us to be fruitful and multiply, like the scriptures say.
That's right. He wants us to.
And that is the reason for marriage, the reason for sexuality.
That's one of the reasons. Look, but God made sex not an unpleasurable experience. Right. That's the goodness of God. The point of it is, it has more than that. Just about. It's not merely about narcissistic
just one
self-gratification.
Taking my own experience, it was the whole romantic courtship that I had with my wife.
Yep.
That actually lasted for almost 50 years.
Almost 50 years.
And that interaction of having that familiar face near to me every day, we got to know each other's weaknesses, and those weaknesses drove each other nuts.
Sometimes, yep.
But the thing of it is that we had both made the commitment to follow Jesus Christ. And it was that commitment that cemented our relationship and kept it alive for all that time. And when she passed away almost 2 years ago now, it was something that I took it as this is something we will all experience. And it came for her a little bit sooner than we expected.
Yeah.
But it was something that I made a commitment that those memories would always be the good ones that she kept with me. Now, there's if you keep swapping partners, then you lose that. It's something that is a problem where you don't have that continuity, and then this is the children that suffer from that when you have a divorce and then you have multiple partners floating through the kid's life. That it really hurts them.
Well, a lot of this is anecdotal, but the biblical text is clear. He's made one man for one woman, and He's made them male and female. And the point of it is this is the biblical. By the way, Doug, I think this is why Genesis is attacked so much, because these people don't want to subscribe. They don't want anybody telling them what to do. And the old adage, Doug, hath God said. Did God really say that? Yes, He did. It's in here. And it's been consistent through centuries, 60 centuries at least of mankind's existence. So the point of it is, Doug, is that now, why do we suddenly think that at the end of time we have a better program? I'm telling you, every time they go against the biblical text, I still remember the communists tried to do it, the French Revolution tried to do it, and every time they do that, they find the culture goes to hell in a handbasket. There's no way to and I mean that literally in some sense. When you invite demonic influence in like that, usually it plays havoc. See, because there's not only a spiritual component that's valid because the Bible, why do you say it? Because the Bible says so. But there's also a pragmatic component. You mentioned some of them. The idea of growing old together the reality is you're all going to grow old. You may not, when you're 25, think you're ever going to get old, and you might not if you die early. But the point of it is, you got two choices: get old or you get dead. And really, all of you are going to get dead at some point. So you get really one choice in one sense. But
and when you grow old, you lose your looks, and you
yeah, we're living evidence of that. We're not the best looking guys on the planet Earth. Okay, the point of it is, God still, you have somebody who's with you that protects you and nurtures you. Yes, and people will come up and say, well, what about this and what about that? I said, are you looking for an excuse to get out of the marriage, or are you trying to figure out a way to make it work? Doug and I are both not saying that divorce is never going to happen again or should never happen again. There are, even Jesus himself said, for certain cases, but the point of it is that where our starting point is, how to get out of something, rather than how to nurture and build something good. Because we're going to have issues with, a woman thinks a lot differently than a man does, and a man a lot different than a woman does, and some of that giving the rough edges off you is working those things out. But that's anecdotal. That's the pragmatic part of it, Doug. Look, Doug, I married your sister. It's been 76. Wow, that was 47 years ago. Yeah, 47 years. A long time ago. But she's been disabled entirely for at least going on 18 years, Doug. Going on 18 years. So anyway, and I've had people say to me, even Christians, God, I don't know how you do that. I said, you do it one day at a time. But I married her in Caroline, I should say, in thickness and in health. But in this case, it really wasn't sick. She was damaged very severely at a hospital. And it really made her incapacitated. Some people maybe can't weather that, but you take it one day at a time. But I said, this was a love of my life God put in there. And I'm going to abandon her. I'm not doing this to promote myself at all. I'm just a guy. And people say, wasn't that hard? I said, it's hard, but it's not really grievous if you love somebody. And we had a life of 30 years together where we were both pretty healthy. And she put up with me for all those years, especially the first 10. I don't know how she put up with me the first 10 years. But point of it is that, that's the joy of it. And God made that. But it's also, Doug, it's an example. The family is protected by a father and a mother for the children's sake, but it also gives you a relational idea how Jesus thinks of the church.
And the fact that you are so different from your wife, and that God made the male and female so different. There's that tension continuously, and I think God put that there on purpose for a test.
Perhaps, I don't know, but whether he did or not, it's there.
and because it's there, you just start to learn how to compromise, to give a little bit to the other person, and to be able to let them have their way a little bit, rather than to insist on your own way all the time. It's a real, even when the wife is wrong, you got to remember rule number one. The wife is always right.
And if you think she's wrong, then go peel rule number one. Yeah, you joke around that, especially in fun times. But it is true, Doug. But the thing is, the children, when they have some stability, generally are better off. There are circumstances, there are things that happen, but the reality is that, and we all make mistakes, we err. That's not the issue. If God gives me grace, can I not give grace to my spouse? Can she not give grace to me? And part of the relationship, Doug, is learning that ability to do that. But the biblical premise is that God hates divorce, that there's a man and a woman, and for the sake of the children, and as Christ loved the church, we're to love our wives. And the wife, she submits to the husband as unto the Lord, not as though he's a heavy-handed, despotic person. If he is, she's kind of, I don't know if she's exempt, but the reality is she's not a servant or a slave. It's like Jesus submitted to God the Father. Does that make Jesus any less God? Right. If a woman submits to the husband, doesn't mean she can't argue with him or disagree with him. That's not the point. The thing is that she any less made in the image of God because she's submitting to the husband. Okay? It's not about servitude. It's about mutual respect and love. Because if Christ loved, what did Christ do for the church, Doug? I mean, first of all, he empowers us. He gave his life for us. He respects us. He forgives us. He trusts us, even when we're not trustworthy. All of those things, I got to tell you, husbands, you don't always live up to those things.
Right.
But that's our goals. And I've never found, I've told this to many, many people. I said, you know what? Man, you can never outgive a woman. Their nature is to nurture and to be giving. But don't betray that trust. I always tell guys, young men, when I counsel them, I said, when you do the dishes, don't tell your wife because she'll see it. Mm-hmm. As soon as you tell the wife, you've lost all your brownie points.
That's right.
You've lost every one of them. Do it for love's sake, not to get a reward out of it. And you probably will get rewarded. But I'm just saying, because she sees. Remember when you were a little kid? Everyone remembers, Doug. God, Mom, you got eyes in the back of your head?
That's right.
Women just see all those little things. I know I'm generalizing. There are some women that are clueless and some men that are really nitpickers. But by and large, that is a generally, guys think in terms of different issues. They think in terms of this and that and bigger ones. Not that they can't do the other one, but it's why for centuries, for millennia, the women most of the time would raise the children and do those kinds of things. And that was a healthy thing. Didn't mean that women can't work or be outside the home. In fact, the biblical text talks about women raising money. There's the guy sitting in the marketplace kind of debating the scriptures. I mean, right. The guys were kind of slugs there in that regard, but maybe not slugs, but they were doing the spiritual things. But the women were actually doing some of the pragmatic stuff. My point of it is all those issues are nuts and bolts issues you can work out. But what does the biblical text, Doug, say? Male and female, he created them. Man should not leave his wife. They cleave and become one flesh. That might be frightening to you, but it's an exhilarating, liberating experience, as people who've been around the block and who've been married a long time can tell you.
Now let's talk about divorce, and the one biblical reason for divorce is fornication.
Or adultery, yeah.
Well, adultery is a special case of fornication.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Fornication encompasses a whole bunch of misuse of the sexual sexual act, and so there's and it goes from lust to pornography to a lot of different things like that, which is outside of the normal use of the sexual act. And I know that people want to be free in the way that they say, well, if you love somebody, but they define the love as a sexual act. And that's a trouble with it, is that a sexual act is only one little piece of the whole love.
Yeah, it used to be even in the movies where they used to say making love, it meant romancing. It didn't really as much mean the sexual, intercourse. It didn't mean that necessarily. Mm-hmm. That's a part of it. That's the culmination when you. But what does the scripture say, Doug? Mm-hmm. The marriage bed is undefiled.
That's right. Yeah.
But everything else is, okay? And you got to understand that. And it doesn't mean there's unforgiveness. We're not trying to breed down to you a bunch of legalistic stuff. There's freedom in marriage that you don't have any other place, And divorce, though, is because you're trying to look for is there something better on the other side of the hill? That's not the only reason that the divorce happens, Doug. Mm-hmm. But it's the only one that's legitimately given, that where Jesus himself, but he was talking to Jewish people who were under the law. Mm-hmm. Remember, under the law, he said Moses could give you a writ of divorce. You could divorce your wife, but I tell you, Jesus he took the law and kind of twisted the knife. He made it even more difficult. If he said, going out and committing sin with somebody is one thing, but if you lust after another woman, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Okay? He said if you call somebody a fool or whatever, you've committed murder. I mean, he really kind of stuck that. He said, because why is that important, Doug?
It's because we have all sinned and come
perfect,
to the glory of God.
That's why grace is so important. And there's so much freedom in Christ. It doesn't mean to go out and live a profligate life because we're going to fail, but it means that we have forgiveness and acceptance by the God who created male and female in his image.
And that's true no matter how much of this stuff you've drug yourself through and become a wallowing a pigsty.
The prodigal son.
That's right.
He was living in a pigsty. He said, "I'm not worthy of being your son, but I'm starving out here. I'm dying." And many of you are out there maybe dying and starving or feeling lonely or lost. Come to Christ. Come to His forgiveness. He made you in His very image, male and female. There isn't 150 different genders.
And then if you're looking for a relationship, a long-term relationship with someone, and you want to ask God to show you how to make that work, because it's something that it doesn't come naturally, but it does come pretty good, through the romantic relationships. And
well, God wired us certain ways.
That's right.
Men and women are wired certain ways, and different things attract us. Sometimes I said, "Lord God, how do we ever get together?" He says, "Well, I made you to get together, even though you're so different in so many respects. There's a commonality of your humanness in my image. Both sides of you reflect who I am."
And part of the romantic relationship is just exploring the differences that and the commonality that you have with this other person, and working out how that will work permanently. And when I asked Vivian to marry me, it was kind of funny, because I said, "Oh, how do you ask a girl to marry you?" And she says, "Well, you will marry me." And I said, "Yes."
Oh, that's
But it was at that point that we,
That's funny.
when we made the decision that we were going to get married, that we then became very serious about what it would take for us to live our lives together rather than separately. And there's a lot of those decisions that you have to make, and not always we have we aren't on the same page, and you have to just negotiate that.
Sometimes you don't feel like you're in the same book.
Right.
But as long as you have the book of the Bible, then you're okay,
But I really am glad that I was able to have a relationship with a woman like Vivian, and have her for almost 50 years, and it was. But now it's a little bit different life right now for me without her.
Well, it's different for me too,
Yeah.
I still have Carol with me, but she's not able to talk or walk, but she's still in the house. She's alive.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I feel like she's right there, but it's much different, Doug. But that's life. Everyone goes through these cycles. It's worth the risk, folks, to live a biblical life. It's worth the risk to submit to what God's authority tells you to do, even though sometimes it's difficult.
One thing for me is that at the end, we had gone through a marriage class, and there weren't anything remaining with issues between us.
Oh yeah, at the end. Yeah.
At the end, and that was.
Yeah.
I was grateful that was the way it ended. Well, we hope you enjoyed our time together on Revolution Against Evolution. We'll see you next time.